sign an exclusive with a buyer, you can actually have two different versions of the buyer representation agreement. It's either exclusive or non-exclusive. So you ask yourself, why do I need to sign a buyer non-exclusive versus an exclusive? This is a non-exclusive. A non-exclusive simply means it's kind of like an open listing in a listing situation where the buyer is free to work with other agents. Whereas if it's an exclusive, buyer is not free to work with another agent. Buyer has to work with you on certain types of property. Can you have an exclusive buyer representation agreement that gives you the exclusive right to represent this buyer in the whole of the United States? Answer is no. Can you have an exclusive that gives you the exclusive right to represent a buyer to buy any properties within the state of California? It becomes a more difficult question to answer. Okay? Generally, speaking, the smaller the area, the more enforceable the agreement is. So if you sign an exclusive representation agreement with the buyer, it may not be a good thing. One, it could be that it is not enforceable because it's too wide an area. Geographically, it is too wide. Okay? Also, from your perspective, how would you like it if you sign an exclusive with a buyer in the Bay Area? Then the buyer comes to you and say, oh, I'm buying a property in San Diego. Can you show this house to me? What are you going to tell this buyer when you have the exclusive? Oh, sorry, I don't cover San Diego. But if you don't cover San Diego, why did you ask me to sign an exclusive for the entire state of California? Oops, I made a mistake. So be careful how you sign your buyer representation agreement, because it could work against you. If you don't want to take buyer to go see homes in certain areas, don't be an exclusive in that area. So chances are you are going to be signing a buyer representation agreement on an exclusive basis for a small area. It could be an area that you work in, say, for example, the city of Pleasanton or the city of Fremont. So at least geographically, it would have to make sense. How about if you sign a buyer representation agreement that is exclusive for the entire county of Alameda? That could make sense to you because you may be interested in covering the entire county of Alameda. What about if you have exclusive for Alameda, Santa Clara, Contra Costa, on this selected county? Yes, you can if you choose to have the exclusive, because that would not be considered too broad. If it's too broad, the court will find it to be not enforceable. Now, if it's not enforceable, the whole agreement is not enforceable. There's no such thing as partial. It is totally not enforceable. When would you want to sign a buyer exclusive representation agreement? Why do you think the association creates such a form? Some people might say, well, it's not common practice that the buyer will want to sign an exclusive representation agreement. Okay. Yeah, that may be true. But if you are a real estate agent, is it wrong to even offer this agreement? No. In fact, it would make sense to offer this agreement. if you offer this agreement to your prospective buyer, what would you say to this prospective buyer that would make sense to them to make you the exclusive? Most of the time, and a buyer contacts you, you want to find out if the buyer is already working with another agent. If the buyer is already working with another agent, you want to find out if the buyer signed an exclusive with that agent. If the buyer already signed an exclusive with that agent, the Code of Ethics says you cannot even touch that buyer, right? If the buyer already have an exclusive, you can't even touch that buyer, correct? Because that would be in violation of the Code of Ethics. So, on the other hand, there's really nothing wrong with asking the buyer if the buyer is working with another agent. In fact, that will be a better practice, will be to ask the buyer, are you working with another agent already? That will be one of the first few questions you ask. If the person says, no, you're the first agent I contact. Or it could be that that person, the buyer, has already worked with another agent and not happy with that other agent, and now you get a chance to be the exclusive agent for this buyer. Are you concerned or are you afraid that if you ask the buyer if the buyer is willing to sign the exclusive, that the buyer will choose not to hire you? Not necessarily. I mean, you ask, well, can I be your exclusive? The worst that can happen is the buyer saying, no, I don't want you to be my exclusive. But at least you ask them, right? So there's nothing wrong with asking this buyer, can I be your exclusive? Because if you are surprised, because sometimes they actually surprise you, they say, yes, I want you to be my exclusive. Now, can the buyer say, well, you're only exclusive with me and you cannot work with another buyer? Probably not. I mean, why would you agree to work exclusively for a buyer and not have the ability to work with other buyers? It should be the other way around. If you want to sign an exclusive with a buyer, it means that this buyer only has you as their only agent. It doesn't mean that you only have this buyer as your only buyer, because that wouldn't make any sense, right? So assuming that you're able to convince a buyer to sign an exclusive with you, then this form would make sense to you. Then we can start talking about this form, okay? And you will put the buyer's name here. Okay, let's say the buyer is, let's say John Smith. Okay? All right. And then the broker is Lily Garapova. Centermac Realty, not Lily Garapova. It will be Centermac Realty, right?
We should always do Centermac, right?
That's right. Centermac Realty, or Centermac OC, Centermac SD, depending on which branch you're with.
On the broker, we can put.
No question. Now, when you do an exclusive, do you need a beginning and an end date? Can you have an open-ended exclusive? Is it legal? You've all gotten your license. You know what the answer is, right? It's not legal to have an exclusive that does not have an expiration date. So you need an expiration date. And let it be a reasonable expiration date, okay? Now, what if I put 2 years? Is 2 years exclusive buyer representation agreement enforceable? It can be, okay? It might not be fair to the buyer, but it can be. The buyer is stuck with you for 2 years. Now, if you have an exclusive representation agreement with the buyer, the buyer's risk is that if they are not happy with you, they can't go with another agent. for as long as this agreement has not expired. Are you the type of person who would put down 2 years if you're given the opportunity? Or are you the type of person who will say, you know, I need to be fair to this buyer. If this buyer is not happy with me, this buyer is free to fire me after the listing expired. This is kind of like a buyer listing agreement. It is a buyer listing agreement. We just don't call it the buyer listing agreement. We call it the buyer representation agreement. Just a name so that agents, they don't understand that you can have buyer listing agreement, don't get confused. But you can actually call it buyer listing agreement and still be a good name. But we call it the buyer representation agreement because we don't want the buyer to think that, oh, you know, you can't have a buyer listing agreement. No, this is a buyer listing agreement. Okay, so let's say, for example, today is the 14th, all right? I'm a reasonable person. I do a 6-month listing with this buyer, so I'll put down November 13th, okay? No, actually 6 months is, yeah, correct. That's November. All right, now, property to be acquired, what do you need to put here in order for your exclusive to be valid? There are certain things that have to be mentioned for a solid buyer representation agreement. One is the type of properties. 2 is the price range. 3 is the location. It says here, any purchase, lease, or other acquisition of any real property or manufactured home described as. So basically, this seems a little broad. It doesn't say condominium, and it doesn't say single family residence. It doesn't say mobile home. As broad as it is, the language itself is still valid. Okay, so you do not need to limit yourself to just a particular type of property, although you could. So if the buyer does not want me to limit myself to just a particular type of property, fine. I don't limit, I don't restrict myself. Any kind of real property or manufactured home, including a mobile home, is included in the buyer representation agreement. The location, usually you can either put a very small location or a bigger area. You can put Fremont. That would be the name of a city. Or if you don't want to limit yourself, you can put multiple cities. You can put Fremont, Milpitas, Santa Clara. Both Fremont and Milpitas are located within the county of, Milpitas and Santa Clara are both in the county of Santa Clara. Fremont is in the county of Alameda. So location can be described in terms of county. So I put Alameda County and Santa Clara County. Let me ask you this. Is it necessary to be overbroad? Think about it. When you show properties to buyers, do you go all over the place, all over the Bay Area? You're very seldom going all over the Bay Area. You pretty much focus in a small area. The person tells you, I'm looking in this neighborhood. Just the word neighborhood suggests that it's a small area. If you're only working in a small area, you would have invested your time and energy on this buyer in a small area. Certainly, you can restrict yourself to a small neighborhood. Okay? For example, Mission, Fremont, that's a neighborhood, right? You can put down Mission, Fremont. Or you can say Bay Area. Bay Area is kind of broad, right? Sometimes if it's too broad, you're at the risk of the court not enforcing this agreement. Especially, you never took the buyers all over the Bay Area to look at properties, or you are not required to take the buyers all over the Bay Area, right? So I think that, you know, be reasonable, be fair to the buyer, and don't have to be greedy though. If the buyer likes you, the buyer will stay loyal to you anyway. But if you want to sign a buyer representation agreement because you intend to be spending a lot of time on this buyer, taking the buyer around, that's fine. Put it in your buyer representation agreement that is exclusive. It shows this buyer that perhaps you want to spend a lot of time on her. You want to protect your investment, in terms of your time, resources, and energy. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to take this buyer to go see property in the city of Fremont. So I would say Mission area in the city of Fremont. Okay, that's all I'm going to be showing. And price range, if the buyer already expressed you what price range the buyer is working in, put in the price range. You know, in Mission is probably 1.5. Oh yeah, 1.1. I don't know what the requirements are. You know better, right? Okay. To let's say 2.2. Okay, so I mean, whatever price range that you think you will be working with this buyer, you put down that price range. And what happened to my location? Notice it disappeared. Mm-hmm. So you either specify price range or location, right? Now, if I put in a Mission here, right? Okay, now I got location, and then I got area, right? If you like, you can put other, but from an agent's perspective, the broader, the better. I mean, if the buyer may say, okay, I'm only looking in a single-family residence, so you may put down single-family residence, right? So you got single-family residence in the Mission area in the city of Fremont, and in that price range. Okay? You can make it as narrow as this one, or you can make it slightly broader, Alameda County, but you know, put in something that makes sense to this buyer though. Okay? Here, if he wants to limit himself to just a certain type of property, certainly you can put single family residence here. Okay? You can put single family residence. And then sometimes some buyers may say, I want you to be exclusive, and you're probably okay with it because you've taken this buyer to look at 20 homes. And if you have shown these properties to this buyer, there are good reasons why you want to be exclusive, so that if you give this buyer a list and say, okay, I'll take you to see these 10 homes, and I want to be exclusive on these 10 properties, okay, because I'll be investing my time and energy taking you to see these properties, then you can instead of putting A1, you basically leave A1 blank, A2 blank, and then just submit A3, check A3, and then submit a list. Because the list will show what properties you are showing this person. Sometimes A3 makes a lot of sense. If you have already made an appointment with this buyer, and you say, okay, I'm taking you to see these 6 homes. Can you please sign the exclusive with me? Okay? To be your exclusive agent for helping you with these 6 properties or 10 properties. The person may say yes. If the person say yes, you can leave 1 and 2 blank and just check on number 3 and attach a list. But if you don't have any list in mind, you can make it broader. That's totally up to you, though, how you want to set your requirements. Okay. Now, there are a couple of things that you have to disclose. If you're taking the buyer to only see the properties that Centermac listed, then you might want to check this box here. Now, here you have to say, does Centermac list the property or not? If Centermac does not list the property, you check here. If Centermac lists the property for sale, you want to check here. Okay? And then here you got your standard agency disclosure. You basically advise the buyer that you might also be representing the seller, and you're getting the buyer to consent to that. Okay, because sometimes you may be taking the buyer to see properties that you listed yourself. Okay, here's you have the agency disclosure here. Okay, single, or if you don't intend on representing the seller, then you will opt for this one, single agency only. Okay, if it's single agency, then you have to decide, is this Centermac's listing or not Centermac's listing? If it's single agency, it means that another agent is listing the property, you're not. That's what it means here. Okay? Because sometimes you might be taking the buyer to go see properties listed by another Centermac agent, even though it's not your own listing. They say single agency. In this case, it means that you do not want to represent the seller. You only want to represent the buyer. That's what single agency means. Non-confidential, other potential buyers. This is a very important paragraph. I'll explain to you what this means. It says buyers understand that other potential buyers through broker make offers on or acquire the same or similar properties as those buyer is seeking to acquire. Buyer consents to broker's representation or such other potential buyers before, during, and after the representation period or any extension thereof. This is a standard provision. By signing this broker representation agreement or buyer representation agreement with the buyer, you are not depriving yourself of the opportunity to work with other buyers. This paragraph gives you the right to do so. Non-confidentiality of offers. This one also gives this one basically advises the buyer that if they submit an offer, their offer may not be confidential. It says buyer is advised the seller or listing agent may disclose the existence, terms, or conditions of buyer's offer unless all parties and their agent have a signed written confidentiality agreement. Whether any such information is actually disclosed depends on many factors, such as current market conditions, the prevailing practice in the real estate community, the listing agent's marketing strategy, and the instructions of the seller. As a listing agent, generally speaking, you have no obligation to keep the buyer's offers confidential unless you agree to do so. Some selling agent may request that you keep their offers confidential, and if you choose to agree to it, you have to abide by it. But otherwise, the default is that you don't keep any of the offers confidential. Okay? Now, somebody have asked me a question. If you're the listing agent, you just finished your open house, there were like 2 buyers that approached you to be their agent. In other words, they both want you to be a dual agent. Can you legally be a dual agent for both of them? and ethically be a dual agent for both of them? Okay, let's analyze that. Is there a law in California that says if you are representing a buyer on a listing that you have, it's your own listing, that you must decline a second buyer, you must decline a representation of the second buyer. In other words, as a listing agent, if two buyers or more approach you and say, we want you to be a dual agent, can you say yes to both of them? That's the issue, correct? There is no law that says you cannot. It's a question of fiduciary duty. When you represent one buyer, do you have the duty to disclose to the second buyer that you're already representing the first buyer? Same thing. Before you agree to represent the second buyer, do you have a duty to disclose to the first buyer that you want to represent the second buyer? I'm sure you guys are curious about the answers, right? Because you'll come out a lot, right? Now, let's say, for example, Kathleen, she just had her open house, and she's in the exact situation. What would be the benefit to a listing agent to be a dual agent? Well, the benefit is that you save the other half of the commission. You basically keep the other half of the commission to yourself. That's the benefit. What is the disadvantage? The disadvantage is now you owe fiduciary duties to two sides. And the disadvantage is that you cannot disclose your seller's bottom line to the buyer, and you cannot disclose the buyer's bottom line to the seller. That's the disadvantage you have. But on the other hand, when you are representing one side only, there's no law that says you cannot disclose your seller's bottom line. But there is another issue. Say, for example, if an agent who represents the buyer calls me and say, Kenny, what's your seller's bottom line? Will I violate any law if I say to this buyer that my seller's bottom line is this number? Yeah. Lower than this number, my seller would not go for it. Well, the law says the only time you cannot disclose your seller's bottom line is when you're a dual agent. But when you're not dual agent, what law or what code of ethics would you violate if you disclose your seller's bottom line when you're not a dual agent? There's no law that says you cannot, right? But when you disclose your seller's bottom line to a buyer's agent, are you hurting your seller or are you helping your seller? It depends. You could be helping your seller. Because if a buyer knows this is your seller's bottom line, he will not make an offer that is below that price, correct? Let's say I got 5 buyers. They all want to know my seller's bottom line, all right? Now, if I get my seller to okay though, now before you disclose your seller's bottom line, even to other buyers that are represented by their own agent, which the law says there's no restriction, you can do that. However, before you disclose your seller's bottom line to the buyers, it's always better to check with your seller. Do you mind if I tell them that? Of course, the seller is going to ask, well, how would it benefit? Wouldn't it hurt me if they know my bottom line? Not necessarily. If there are 5 buyers competing for the property, they're all going to come in at that price or above that price. Because if they all come in at that price, it doesn't mean that I will accept that price, even though that price is my bottom line. Telling you my bottom line doesn't mean I'm going to accept that price. It's just simply basically saying that I will not go below that. It also doesn't mean that I'll pick your offer if you come in at that price. So in a way, it may not necessarily hurt the seller. Sometimes it might even help the seller, because you know why? If you have 5 buyers interested, one buyer came in, let's say your seller's bottom line is 950, and a buyer was planning to offer 900. Basically, by telling that person the seller's bottom line, and if this person is represented by an agent, so you can legally tell that buyer's agent the seller's bottom line is 950, he would not come in at 900. He will come in at 950, right? If the seller's bottom line is 950, correct? But he also knows that at 950 he may not get the property. So in this case, telling your seller's bottom line does not hurt your seller. In fact, if anything, it might create competition and drive up the price. So it's not always bad that you disclose your seller's bottom line. It kind of depends on the situation. Now, going back to that question about if you are a listing agent, 2 buyers also, they both come to you and say, okay, we want you to be our dual agent. Can you legally be their dual agent? First of all, you start with whether there's a law that says you cannot do that. We know there is none, okay? There's no law that says you can't represent 2 buyers and be their dual agent, no law. So to start, there may be possibility that you can represent both buyers. On the other hand, why would both buyers want to use you as their agent? Because they think that by using you as their agent, they have an advantage, right? But the law also say, if you want to represent a buyer and a seller, they both need to know that you represent both sides. But there's no law that says that when you represent 2 buyers, they each have the right to know that you represent more than 1 buyer. There is no law that says that. However, in our standard offer package, there's always a form that says possible representation of more than 1 buyer or seller, and you get them to sign consent. By having them sign this form, you're already protected as far as the disclosure law. You already disclose to them that if I represent you as a buyer, I could also be representing another buyer, because I have you sign that possible representation of more than 1 buyer, correct? If you sign that form, aren't you protected already? So, yes, you can do that. But then there may be certain fiduciary duties that you owe to your seller and these 2 buyers that you have to be careful about. All I'm talking about is just the disclosure, agency disclosure law. I have not gone into the fiduciary duty part. Let's say 1 buyer comes to you and say, all right, can you tell me what your seller's bottom line is? You know that's a no-no, because you're now representing both the seller and the buyer. You cannot tell this buyer what the seller's bottom line is, right? Now, can this buyer say, well, what price should you recommend? You can recommend whatever price you want without telling the buyer what the seller's bottom line is. You can say to this buyer, all right, if you know the seller's bottom line is 950, you can say to this buyer, come in at 955. That's my recommended price, right? Mm-hmm. And then this other buyer also asks you the same thing. Do you have to be fair to both buyers? Mm-hmm. Recommend 955 to this buyer. You must recommend 955 to the other buyer? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily. Because you know why? You make recommendations based on the individual buyer situation. If that buyer has not much room already, how can you be fair when this guy can only offer up to 945 and you recommend 955? Aren't you not doing a favor for this? You're not doing a favor for this buyer. The other buyer has room. He can go all the way to $1 million and you recommend 955. So just because you recommend 955 to 1 buyer, you have to be fair to this buyer. You also recommend 955. You don't. Each buyer is handled separately. If they ask you to recommend, you're not required to recommend the same price. There's no law that says you must recommend the same price. They can be different depending on the individual situation, and also depending on how much you know this buyer. Is he an aggressive type or is he a conservative type? How much does he care if he overbid on the property? One person may care a lot, the other person may not. So you are not required by law to make the same recommendation to these buyers. Being fair doesn't mean that. Being fair means you are required to protect their individual interests. You are not required to make the same recommendation. They can be different. All right? Now, the fact that this buyer won the bid, the other one did not win the bid, means that you breach your fiduciary duty to the person that did not win the bid. Not necessarily. It depends on how and why you make certain recommendation, right? Because you know what, both buyers want to know, well, what's your seller's bottom line, and of course you can't tell them. And both buyers want to know, well, what's your recommended price? My answer is always going to be, well, based on your individual situation, here's my recommended price. Because one person's situation is different from another.
Can you say higher than that?
That's right. You can always say, give me your best price. But then they're going to say, well, then why did I hire you as my dual agent for? I want some inside information, right? You know, you can't give them inside information. However, on the other hand, you can help them put in their best bid. You can help them put in their best bid based on what you know. Their best bid may not be the seller's bottom line. Seller's bottom line may not be the winning price. The winning price could be below seller's bottom line, or it could be above seller's bottom line. We don't know. So in theory, whereas the law does not prohibit, you can actually represent more than one buyer as their dual agent without violating any law, but you have to do it right. Okay, there are certain laws you have to abide by. Okay. All right, let's go on. And so if you are, let's say for example, two buyers came to you and say, all right, we want you to be our dual agent. All right, so at that point, can you offer them this representation, exclusive representation agreement? You want me to be your dual agent? Fine. I want to be your exclusive for all your purchases within this area, not just limited to this one, including this one. I want to be your exclusive. You want me to be your dual? I want to be your exclusive. Most likely they'll say yes, because they want you to be their dual agent. That's right, yeah? If you want to, before you become a dual agent, you want me to be your dual agent? How about sign this exclusive? I'll be your dual agent, right? Now, you have to be careful though. What does it mean to be this buyer's exclusive? Does it mean you have to give up your exclusive with your seller? That's another thing you have to look at. Before you say to this buyer, I'll be your exclusive, must you consider your exclusive listing agreement with your seller? You have to consider that. Think about that. Can you violate the exclusive listing agreement with the seller if you have the buyer sign this exclusive for this property? What does being an exclusive agent to this buyer mean to your seller? Because remember what the seller says? The exclusive that you have with your seller, it means that the seller, the exclusivity is against the seller. It's not against the agent. Even the seller signed the exclusive listing agreement with the agent. Agent is free to be a dual agent, remember that, right? Exclusive against the seller. The seller cannot sign with another agent. Right. So the exclusive, the buyers means the same thing. The buyer cannot work with another agent but spoke with you, whereas you are free to work with other buyers, right? Now, let's see here. This is an interesting discussion here, okay? Now, let's say, for example, you're the listing agent. Buyer comes to you. You want to use this exclusive agreement on this buyer before you become the dual agent. Think about, well, here you have to disclose though that are you going to be single agency? In this case, you can't be single agency because you are dual agent. So you will not check any of these boxes, correct? Rather, you skip these boxes altogether because now you're going to be a dual agent, right? Whereas being a dual agent here doesn't mean you cannot have an exclusive with this buyer. You can. The buyer can't work with another agent, but you can work with another buyer. So two buyers come to me, I have them sign both exclusive. I can't, because the exclusive says neither one of you can work with another agent, but I can work with more buyers if I want to. Correct? So this is such a powerful tool. If they both come to you and say, hey, Kenny, we want you to be our dual agent. Fine, first sign the exclusive, then I'll be your dual agent.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
See how big of an advantage this form would be when you are the listing agent? You see, this is even more powerful when you are the listing agent. Shouldn't you become a listing agent then?
I have a question.
Later. No question, okay? All right. So I'm just giving you some pointers as to when you can actually use this form and gain a lot of advantages. Especially when you're the listing agent. They want to sign with you. They will say absolutely yes. And they sign. And if they are not successful on this property, you get to take them to see other properties.
Yeah.
That's right, right? Now they can't work with another agent. They must work with you. Right? Okay. All right, compensation to broker, you cannot skip this one. If you skip this one, you don't have an enforceable contract. So usually, this is what I do. You can either specify, most buyers will not pay you for the commission. They'll make the seller pay, right? So usually what I do is pursuant to compensation schedule attached as an addendum. You can put it on the addendum, or I'll simply just put it down here, per MLS now, of course, if you are the listing agent, you're asked to be the buyer's exclusive. Certainly, you just simply say seller pay, right? Seller paid commission per listing agreement. In this case, right? Because the buyer don't have to pay you, right? So, or you can just type it on the addendum, right? There are different ways, different options, depending on the risk, but you have to specify a way to determine your commission, or else you don't have an enforceable exclusive. Don't forget this step. If you leave this one blank, it could be found to be unenforceable. Put in something here that makes sense. There must be a way to pay you for your commission. Okay? All right, great. The rest of it, broker right to commission, I will not comment on that. Compensation payment and credits. Buyer is responsible for payment of compensation provided in this agreement. This one may have to be modified though, because what if you're the listing agent, so the buyer was not the winning bid, and now you get to take this buyer to look at other properties in the area. But this is still a valid agreement, so you may need to kind of modify do it by way of addendum. Instead of putting it here, you will do an addendum, right? And this is what the addendum is going to say. Let's say if I'm the dual agent, okay, and I want to do an addendum for this buyer representation agreement exclusive. And how should I write this agreement now? Because this buyer may not win the contract, and then you get to take this buyer, go see other properties, right? Okay. Purchase agreement. This will be, this is not even a purchase agreement. It will be simply other. So you put down buyer representation agreement, right? right? And you put in the date, and then you put in the property, and technically this is between the agent and the buyer, correct? So here where they have the tenant's name, buyer's name, you just put in the buyer, John Smith, right? Okay. Now here you got seller or landlord. So you're using a form where they don't have a proper name here. So how do you make use of this form? You can still put in the Centermac Realty in, okay? And then you can say Centermac reference above as seller landlord is the broker to the buyer, okay? That's all you need to do to change this form so you can use it. And then you can put this as number 1, right? And number 2, you can say, you can list whatever unique situation, because you can say for 123 Main Street, for which broker is the listing agent, broker agrees to be paid its commission from the seller. Huh? Yeah, listing agent, right? So all of this can be customized, right? And you can actually collab with me. I'll put in the language for you. Because if you were yourself to do it, you're not an attorney. You're not savvy enough to write proper contract. You wouldn't know what to write. You will write something and maybe it doesn't cover the situation. So you can actually collab with me. I'll do it for you, okay, if you have that special situation. In this case, because I am an attorney, for me to write something like that is very easy. I don't have to think very hard, right? So I got, and then you can say for other properties on the attached list, right? Broker agree to be paid from the listing agent based on the published commission split on the MLS you can say on the MLS according to its rules, because the MLS has no rules about commission split. So basically, by putting in these 2 paragraphs here, you are saying to the buyer that you don't pay any of my commission. My commission will come from either one of them, okay? However, you can put in another one that says, if buyer breaches this agreement, buyer agrees to pay broker the commission broker is entitled to receive under paragraph 2 and 3. In other words, if everything is done correctly, you're not paying me a dime. But if you breach the agreement, then you agree to pay my commission based on what I'm supposed to receive if I'm the listing agent. Or if I'm not the listing agent, what I'm supposed to receive as your exclusive buyer's agent. Because you went with another agent without me, I should have earned that 2.5% published on the MLS because you went with another agent. Okay? I have not carefully thought this out yet, so don't raise your hands, okay? So I'm sure you have questions, but I'm just giving you some pointers, how you can use this buyer representation agreement. There's more than one way to use it. I'm just letting you know. Okay? All right? Okay, good. Now, so let's go back to that form, okay? I lost that form already. There are some paragraphs in that form that actually would not make sense in most instances. For example, it says buyer pay broker's commission, which never really happens, okay? So if you want to use this form, it's best that you collab with me so I can go in and make whatever changes we need to make the form make sense to you, okay? Because definitely you need to make some changes, right? And since you're not a lawyer, you wouldn't know how to make the changes, right?
How would you find out that the buyer went with another agent? How would they find out they breached the contract?
Sometimes you find out, sometimes you don't. Because, it's a matter of luck. Sometimes, you happen to find out. Because you know what, you can go to Realty text and start searching the names.
Ah, the name of the buyer.
Yeah, the name of the buyer has become the new owner. His name is going to show up, say, oh, shoot, he bought this property without me and it's in the county of Alameda. I have an exclusive with him within the county of Alameda, right?
What's the period of enforcing this contract? Exclusive. What's the...
Whatever period you specify in the agreement.
No, like in 6 months you can actually go up.
The statute of limitation is 4 years on the written contract, okay?
4 years. What's that?
If you find out within 4 years, then you have a shot.
Within 4 years.
If it's after 4 years, too bad, too late, okay? I got no time. Let me finish what I need to say, okay? You guys can ask me questions individually. I have no time right now. Don't ask me any more questions, okay? Timing of acquisition. The rest of it are really not that important, but please remember to check buyer's inspection advisory and also the SBSA, okay? And that's, I told you the most important part already. The rest is kind of like standard provision, telling basically buyer that, you have to cooperate, you have to negotiate in good faith if I represent you. And then it talks about the broker's duty, what's the broker supposed to do, things like that. It says, while broker will perform the duties specified in paragraph 6b, broker recommends buyers select other professionals to do the inspections and things like that. Yeah, really not much to talk about it other than your typical duties as a broker. Authorizations, marketing, timing of compensation. Let's talk about that. Compensation is payable upon completion of any resulting transaction if there's an escrow open. acquisition is prevented by default of buyer upon buyer's default. Now, if the guy actually hire another agent to bid on the property, and then he open escrow, now he's in breach of the contract. At that time, you can make a demand on him. You owe me 2.5%. Yeah. If acquisition is prevented by a party through a transaction other than buyer, when buyer collects damages by suit, this one has nothing to do with most situations, so don't worry about number 3 here. Buyer hereby irrevocably assigns to broker the compensation provided for in paragraph 3A. Now, what's the purpose of this one? This one basically gives you the right to make a demand on the escrow to give you the commission instead. Say, for example, you have an exclusive with the buyer on another property, and the buyer did it without your consent. The buyer had hired a different agent, open escrow. You know, you want to make a demand on the buyer to pay you, but then the escrow would have to decide who to pay the commission to. Usually, the escrow will withhold the money if there's a dispute. Okay, so if the escrow withholds the money because of this paragraph 3, and you win the lawsuit against the broker, the other broker, and the buyer, you can actually get a court order to make the escrow pay the commission to you instead of to the other broker.
Who's going to be our lawyer? You?
No, I will not be your lawyer. Okay, so that's it. So that's important of that. Compensation to broker, we talked about that. Okay, that's it. See you guys next time.
Can I ask you, in case like with Jen, right? She told the story when she signed the listing agreement and she sell